For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Okay, looks like we are live tonight on Standing for Truth. We got some good people in the house. Good to see everybody in the chat. Doki Doki Bible Club, good to see you here. I hope you got your bananas. I know you were saying that earlier. One Punch Man says, Brother Standing for Truth, you going to respond to Erica in this video? We will definitely be answering some of her questions. I've got some good articles and papers and videos to go over. So tonight's going to be quite interactive. It's going to be fun, I think. Chris Keith, good to see you, brother. Good to see everybody. Thanks for the support. We love you guys. Chris says, SFT doing his insanity work. Yeah, today I took the day off there, actually, Chris. Even SFT needs a day off from good old insanity. Yeah, good to see everybody. Matt, Nicholas, awesome. Yeah, tonight's gonna be fun. We're gonna be covering quite a bit. I think this is probably going to be a series over the next few weeks because there's just too much to cover. Tons of articles, papers to read on these issues regarding the fossil record, especially when it comes to the so-called hominids. But announcement-wise, actually, if anybody hasn't yet seen it, everybody probably has. Definitely check out another Evolutionist Bites the Dust episode with Dr. Rob STADLER. Dr. Rob STADLER educates Professor Dave on abiogenesis. Getting a lot of feedback, good feedback there. That is definitely a must-watch. Rob's a beast. And he's owning the comment section as well. So any critics come in there with a response. Anybody wants to take the abiogenesis challenge, we have an army ready and willing to take out their arguments. I'd love to see, quote unquote, Professor Dave respond to that one. Definitely won't hold my breath. So yeah, definitely check that one out. We've got this Thursday, the rescheduled debate between Dr. Dino and Derek Barnes. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Working on some interviews, discussions as well, some more videos. So the fun never ends. Lots for everybody to look forward to. Yeah, so many things to cover here. The reason why I titled it Low Confidence Science, the Fossil Record, because that's exactly what evidence for evolution from the fossil record is. And we're going to be having Dr. Rob STADLER back on again, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, on his book, The Scientific Approach to Evolution, What They Didn't Teach You in Biology, where he covers a number of criteria that can determine if an observation or a line of evidence, for example, fits the high confidence science or low confidence science, and definitely the fossil record would be that of low quality, low confidence science, because it comes down to the direct versus the indirect lines of evidence. It comes down to how many assumptions are required. When it comes to the fossil record, I like how STADLER points out in his book. And there's 6 criteria. Number 5 is many assumptions are required, especially for the fossil record. He points out that the synthesis of collections of observations about fossils into a story of how the fossilized life forms were produced requires many assumptions to fill in the unknowns. Bias, clear opportunities for bias when it comes to the fossil record. He points out because the evidence is so indirect, interpretation of the observed findings is highly dependent on personal bias. This is 100% obvious. He points out that the bias is amplified by the strong polarization of people on opposite sides of the debate. And he also goes into observations, of course, as well as the fossil record being indirect. That's why we love genetics. We love biology. Genetics is the best way to determine ancestry because bones in the dirt can oftentimes be deceiving, especially where there's no genetics. You're looking at morphology, anatomy, and morphology can oftentimes fail us because as is pointed out by numerous paleoanthropologists, numerous apologists of creation and evolution, there's oftentimes more variation, okay? More variation within the same species than between species. And sometimes the evolutionists scoff at me for saying that. So what's funny is, maybe this is a good place to start. I will screen share, audio share as well. Let's see, hopefully everybody can see. Okay, we've got one of their own admitting the same thing. Now, of course, he is going to contradict himself because this individual loves to look at fossils as well. And what he says at the end is very, very telling. So pay attention. This is just a shorter clip. But let's go. Why morphology fails us. So you can see it's on YouTube. I've got a few of these videos on unlisted, so you guys won't be able to see them, but you can see them here. So let's go. Pay close attention as to why genetics really is the most important determination of ancestry.
Dogs of all types have shown that morphology alone can sometimes fail us because there is often more diversity within a species than between species. For example, some of these skulls are from different genera or different families, but the most diverse skulls in this collection are all from the same species. That makes it a bit difficult to classify them by their physical traits alone. So instead, we turn to their genome. By evaluating a large sample of DNA of different closely related species, it is possible to estimate morphologic emergence and even mutation rates over time to determine when the divergence occurs. Dogs of all types have shown that morphology alone can sometimes fail us because there is often more diversity within a species than between species.
So this is just a fact that when it comes to morphology and anatomy, when we don't have the genetics, it's oftentimes tough to determine ancestry. And even though the evolutionists claim that all life is descended through common ancestry, it would be tough for them to determine what is the result of, say, convergent evolution, what shares recent ancestry, for example. So this is just a fact. And if you noticed at the end there, Doki Doki says, I know that voice. Yes. Well, imagine those dog skulls found in the fossil record, buried, okay? All of that variation within the same species. And it doesn't just apply to dogs, but it's an easy example. You could come up with all types of interpretations. That's why the fossil record is low confidence science, because it results in a lot of interpretation. It results in a lot of storytelling. And the fossil record is incredibly fragmentary. And they don't oftentimes want to admit that in their videos when they're responding to us. But you can see it all throughout their literature as to how they point out the fact that it is very fragmented, and the fact that, like, for example, Lee Berger himself, he said, because everything in the paleo community is contested, okay? They're arguing with each other over everything. That's why oftentimes you can get the arguments directly from themselves, okay? And actually, before I quote Lee Berger here, Aaron Ra there mentioned molecular clocks genetics. Exactly. Go check our last few videos where I cover in great detail the mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree from the 1,000 Genomes Project, and how there's so few mutations, and how the evidence suggests that we've all come from one female. We can look at the Y chromosome, do the same thing. We can look at the number of mutations. We can look at the number of mutations that separate us from the chimpanzee, for example. We can look at the Y chromosome dissimilarity. I mean, there's a number of lines of evidence that we can look to in genetics, molecular clocks, DNA function, for example. So the fact that Aaron Ra pointed that out, that we can use molecular clocks, we should use genetics to determine ancestry ultimately, since morphology can oftentimes fail us. It's funny that that's exactly what we do, and that's exactly what we challenge them to do. That's where our testable predictions are. It's the direct line of evidence. So Lee Berger, though, his son discovered, I guess, the first specimen of Sediba. And Lee Berger is well known in the paleo community, and he talks about some of the hypotheses, I guess, that attack or conflict with his Sediba finding and his Sediba, Australopithecus Sediba interpretation. So he points out that this hypothesis faces difficulties. He says because of a nostalgia for previous hypotheses, and because Sediba's remarkably informative skeletons are being compared to what? with a fragmentary and disassociated record of a small number of bits and pieces, many of which have simply been cobbled together into the basket we call early Homo. Early Homo, when it comes to the evolutionists, is very fragmented. The evidence just really isn't there. That's why it's oftentimes referred to as a bushy mess. There's no more clarity when it comes to human evolution. I mean, I've got quote after quote here where they're talking about just how fragmented it is. You can read it in their literature. I want to point out something here. Let's see, go back to StreamYard. I may have to screen share this. Good to see everybody. Nicholas, good to see you here. I hope you enjoyed the Dr. Carter interview. Hopefully we'll have him back on. Actually, let's see. So we've got some papers here. We're going to touch on, there's a few questions as well that's been asked to us. This one, if you can see on the screen, this one's from Gutsick Gibbon. In as much detail as possible, explain what anatomically constitutes a human and what constitutes an ape in the hominin fossil record, not the species criteria. So we're going to get to that one, as well as provide a single example of human bones being found in association, that is to say the same layer as existing transitional specimens. Actually, you know what? This one's kind of interesting that she points out. Let's talk about the fact that you can see in my thumbnail Australopithecus sediba. Okay, there's been a number of papers now out and articles associated with it that Australopithecus sediba is not likely a human's ancestor. And this one here on the screen shows us that the fossil record for the ancient hominin Australopithecus sediba is younger than that of Homo, a highly unlikely scenario for a direct lineage. This one here, new studies shake up human family tree. I believe the paper itself is from 2019, I believe. There's a 2 million-year-old skeleton unseat Lucy from a critical evolutionary junction on the way to Homo argenus. There it is, Australopithecus sediba. So I'm going to share screen again here and go over a few things regarding sediba and a few things that Gutsick Gibbon has pointed out as well. So this is a newer paper. Actually, I believe, let me see here. I want to see, this is newer. I'm not sure if Contested Bones talks about it, but yeah, so what they're concluding now is the fact that for many reasons, Sediba, who they say is the number one transitional, and we're going to get into a few aspects there. The thing is, they constantly, I've got quotes here where Australopithecus sediba coexisted with the Homo genus, for example, Erectus. Now they're going to say that, you know, Erectus is a primitive human when we've given numbers of lines of evidence based on intelligence, based on culture, for example, that, you know, Erectus was human in every way, shape, and form. And in a lot of your Australopithecines, we've got a number of lines of evidence and data suggesting that the Australopithecines, your Homo genus, your so-called best transitional forms, like even Sediba, they coexisted. And as you've seen here, for a number of reasons, they've now stated, they've actually stated in a paper that I have here that I'll screen share in a minute, that Sediba, being in the direct line of the Homo genus, has actually been thoroughly falsified, and that it is just a dead end. But I do want to point out, actually, before I get to this, there's just so many things here I want to touch on. The fact that, so here's the paper if you want to see it. Temporal evidence shows Australopithecus sediba is unlikely to be the ancestor of Homo. So definitely check that out. I want to point out a major issue when it comes to the fossil record, when it comes to the interpretations being made. Now, I point out in my book why human evolution is false. Okay, I point out that where the followers of human evolution go amiss is they do not understand the Tower of Babel incident. Okay, this all goes back to the Tower of Babel, what we're looking at here in the fossil record. This is unfortunate because the evidence being portrayed and hijacked as evidence for human evolution is actually incredible and amazing confirmation of biblical creation and the Tower of Babel events. Their basic assumption and their inability to question the evolutionary paradigm has hindered them from seeing this much better and more scientific explanation. Once again, this all goes back to the Tower of Babel event. And we're going to touch on exactly what I mean by that. Actually, I think I have the PDF here. So if everybody wants to follow along, what I'll do is screen share it for everybody. And okay, so let's see here. So we'll start with, boom, hopefully everybody can see that. Okay. Let's see. So we'll start with the out of Africa scenario. So we know the out of Africa scenario is not even remotely plausible. I have covered this extensively in, I talk about how in my previous book, but also in my talks, debate. So this is due to just how damaging the connected population bottleneck would have been. Far too many harmful mutations would have come to the forefront due to the persistent inbreeding and lengthy nature of the out of Africa bottleneck. If not driven to extinction, this imaginary population of early man would have, let's see, and you've heard me talk about this, and they've got no plausible answer for how this highly degenerated population could have actually exploded in all parts of the world, seizing dominion over the planet. So it would have been a highly degenerative population bottleneck. So this is just one of the foremost obstacles in sticking to a position that presumes all DNA differences are the outcome of mutations over time. As we know, creationists offer the idea of created heterozygosity. This would imply that the majority of nuclear DNA differences are the result of initial design. We have learned that this hypothesis leads to extremely specific predictions on DNA function. Now I go down here and I want to go to, okay, so let's see this. The out of Middle East model versus the out of Africa model. Okay, so a few people groups would have migrated prior to Babel. These people groups may have been part of the population that assembled at Babel. If this pre-Babel migration resulted in isolation, rapid genetic degeneration would of course occur. This could effortlessly explain why some of the so-called pre-humans that have been discovered are construed as older by paleo experts. Due to the post-flood environmental conditions, biblical ice age, for example, numerous of the anomalous features seen in the hominins could be the result of epigenetic, environmental-related degeneration and adaptation. I want to point out the fact that the Eric Trinkhaus paper, which maybe if we have time we'll pull up later, the fact that he points out that they see a lot of disease and pathology in the fossil record, he also points out a number of other things as well that could explain what we see in the fossil record. And one of them is stress, and the other is survivorship. And what's funny is that's exactly what we would expect to find given the post-Babel circumstances, okay? So we continue here. Now, of course, you know, Eric Trinkhaus, the evolutionist, accused me of misrepresenting him. He's obviously not going to agree with the young Earth creation model. But the thing is, oh, thank you, George. Good thing I just, the article's in the way. So let's see for you guys to follow me. Okay. We'll go, boom. Okay, so now you guys can see. We'll go back to this one. Okay, so the point is, you know, they'll say that we misrepresent these authors, even though, of course, they don't agree with the young Earth creation model. But the fact is, what they're pointing out in these papers that was commonplace in the fossil record is exactly what we would say is commonplace in the post-Babel dispersal. Doki Doki, thank you so much for the super sticker. Thanks for being here. Okay, so we go into, here we go into genetic degeneration, the anomalous features, and this is kind of more just reiterating things. So we'll get to some of the direct answers to the questions in a bit. Okay, so here is an important point to consider as well, okay? As the evidence appears to suggest, these post-Babel, some of them being pre-Babel, probably maybe the Neanderthals, people groups were eventually driven to extinction by either genetic degeneration or human conquest. Since these isolated tribes went extinct first, these would be what the evolutionary community proposes are our earliest ancestors. Now, here's the thing, though. Erica's question about show us human bones in the same layers or alongside the so-called transitionals. Well, here's the thing. They're even admitting now in the paper that I provided that Australopithecus sediba is younger than some of the Homo species, okay, in the Homo genus. Now, yeah, I already understand that the argument will be, erectus isn't true human, but you'd have to fight tooth and nail, just like the Neanderthal they'll say is not truly human. They'll say it's pre-human or a sister group. We're going to cover that in a bit. And here's another thing that I find funny. When I debated Dr. Dam, he even admitted that, I don't care much about the fossils, the bones, the archaeology, this, that, because we got the genetics. And he is right, because genetics is the direct line to determine ancestry. Because I pointed out the fact that everything to do with the Neanderthals' fire use, their tool use, their hunting, the way they treated their dead bodies, they buried their dead bodies. That shows evidence for spirituality. This all confirms the humanity of the Neanderthals. When it comes to the genetics, we have their genes that we've obviously inherited from our Neanderthal-like ancestor. And even though the DNA is slightly out of the range of what we find today in modern humans, okay, based on all the other lines of evidence outside of genetics, we can corroborate the data, okay, and see that the implications suggest Neanderthals are human. But then Dan didn't want to focus on all those other lines of evidence where he admits that genetics is the best way to determine ancestry. But a lot of those other lines of evidence we have for Erectus. So to say Erectus was pre-human or not human, you'd have a lot of hoops to jump through. And all the evidence, everything you see in the paleoanthropological literature shows that the Australopithecines coexisted with the Homo genus, and your Neanderthals, Erectus, Heidelbergensis, Naledi, Hobbits, they all intermingled. The Denisovans, they've all intermingled. There's not just a straight line that you'd expect if evolution was true, where you have these more basal forms, and then you progress, and you see these derived forms, and you eventually get to what we see now, where you've got, the humans, because that's what they would say is what they would predict. But we see that there's been an extensive coexistence. Now, here's the thing. A pit bull and your dog breeds, they can live alongside the wolves where they've ultimately come from. But the domestic dogs can't live before the wolf, okay? You can't live before your great-great-great-grandfather. And this is the point. And this is why they have concluded that Sediba is now a dead end. It's a side branch that, when extinct, doesn't actually lead to modern humans. It's outside of the branch that leads to humans. So they still conclude that Australopithecus afarensis, for example, would be in the direct line leading up to the Homo genus. But that's the thing. So her question, I don't think it's a well thought out question, maybe. I suspect the answer would be, okay, yeah, we find that Erectus is, because they even admit that we find Erectus, and you're going to see this with some paleo experts that have actually agreed with my stance that Sediba is a mixture of different species. Okay, we're going to get into that. I've got a paper here that I haven't seen any extensive rebuttal to. So this is fascinating evidence to me. But these paleoanthropologists do point out that Erectus is oftentimes found in the same areas as your Australopithecines. Okay. So let's see here, which actually all of this would make sense given the post-Babel dispersal. And remember, your animal kinds wouldn't have congregated into one spot like the humans did. They would have migrated first, okay? This is why we also expect low genetic diversity in humans, because they would have had that bottleneck at Babel. Also, God created two people, but that's besides the point right here. So let's see. Since these isolated tribes went extinct first, these would be what the evolutionary community proposes are our earliest ancestors. Also, based on what we understand about the Babel event, it is apparent that the various ape types, including the Australopithecines, would have spread out before humans. Therefore, what we see in the bone beds reflects the different migration, let's see here, the different migration patterns of both the ape types and humans. When proponents of human evolution assert that ape-like creatures such as Lucy evolved first, what they misunderstand is that they spread out first. This is not a forward progression of ape-like creatures evolving into humans. This is simply all a reflection of post-flood and post-Babel history. Okay, now here's where they really miss the point. This is what I wanted to get to, okay? Another thing to consider is that we are not beholding the arrival of culture from ape-like or animal-like ancestors. This is what they like to point out, right? From more primitive to more advanced. We are observing a rekindling of culture by people who essentially lost everything. This is from my Human Evolution book, by the way, for anyone who just joined us. Once that confusion at Babel happened, what we think about the Tower of Babel and the groups of people living there and working together to produce it, we can think of it like our own community that we live in. We all have our own jobs. We've got people that work in the hospital, people who work in construction, people who make and distribute food. We have got farmers, police officers, accountants, and numerous types of doctors. As a matter of fact, the list could go on endlessly. No person does it all, okay? There's no jack of all trades. Yeah, we use that phrase over and over again, but no person can do all these things, okay? There's no expert at everything. Now, I'll continue here. These jobs are broken up amongst the people to live in a functioning and operating community. Now, we can imagine what stemmed from the confusion of the languages at the Tower of Babel scene. Maybe one group had no real practical skills at building or hunting or even farming. This means these groups of people deficient in these types of skills would end up living a very primitive life. Some would even look at it as prehistoric. Isn't this what they look at it as? Prehistoric, right? They even look at the brain sizes and they try and line it up from smallest brains to largest brains. And yet they're doing this with animal types, ape types, and human types that all coexisted. There's no straight line. This is exactly what we'd expect at the Tower of Babel event, okay? Your animal kinds, your various ape types would have all spread out. A lot of your ape types would have went to Africa. And then you've got the human kind who eventually congregate at Babel, and then they finally spread out. Okay, so yeah, a lot of your ape types will look older, but at the same time, we would expect exactly what we see within the coexistence, intermingling. There's even evidence that humans have eaten the Australopithecines, okay? So let's see. So this is what we are seeing in the fossil record. The case is closed. Every one of their most praised lines of evidence have been thoroughly refuted in this book. Okay, so I want to go to, I think I'm going to pull up a video here that I want everybody to watch when it comes to the genetics. When we have the genetics, when we have the evidence that can result in high confidence science, it always supports biblical creation. It always supports the Babel event. So I'm going to share a screen here, and then at the same time, I can join some people in the chat. Okay. Refuting the Critics, Neanderthals are human. So I want to point this one out and make sure you get here and go from there.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
A question that comes to my mind is I've heard this a few times from some militant critics. They'll adamantly say that Neanderthals, they exhibit a different set of biodiversity when being compared to Homo sapiens. So what I've seen them say, Dr. Carter, is that when we characterize and quantify those differences, this ends up putting Neanderthals as a sister group as compared to the same species as Homo sapiens. So I guess in other words, what best explains the Neanderthals according to a biblical creation model?
That's a very difficult question. And I have several different possible answers, and I'm not satisfied with all of them. I'm going to say that Neanderthals represent an early branch of man, and I think ancient man is different than modern man. I think modern man we actually descend from only a subset of the post-flood population in general.
Right.
So Homo erectus, Neanderthal, Denisovans.
I'm going to pause it right there. See, a lot of people forget that we would only descend ultimately from a subset of the original people, and from the pre-flood world and from the immediate post-flood world too. And you've got a lot of side branches, of course, too. But those side branches, especially if a people group migrated almost just a few generations after the flood, and then eventually, due to environmental conditions, due to the inbreeding, the rapid genetic degeneration, they would have ultimately gone extinct. Well, that extinct type, like the Neanderthals, for example, would exhibit an entirely different set of biodiversity than us today, modern humans that are still here. We've been changing since. We haven't gone extinct. We're not a side branch. So I just want to point that out. But what's funny is, there's so many reasons, as Dr. Carter is pointing out, to explain the biodiversity of the Neanderthals. But oftentimes the critic doesn't want to acknowledge that point, right? They want to feel like they've got the irrefutable argument, but then they don't want to concede that, hey, these are some plausible explanations and they fit the data. So let's continue.
Those are, in fact, probably probably Homo erectus is Denisovans. One is a skeleton without a genome, one's a genome without a skeleton. I'm assuming that they're the same, but I don't know that yet. When you look at the hunter-gatherers in southern Africa, when you look at the hunter-gatherers in modern hunter-gatherers in southern Africa, or the ancient ones in other places in the world, their genomes are different. They're actually more diverse in some ways. We've lost a lot of genes over time. So that's one answer. They're more genetically different because they're earlier. But also, they're Neanderthals specifically, that's the most inbred population we've ever seen. From Spain to Siberia, thousands of miles in extent, they are shockingly inbred. Their runs of homozygosity are really high, even though they're a lot different and they have a lot of different diversity than we do. These long stretches of identical letters in their genomes, meaning, their dad married their sister and things like that. This is true population.
I'm going to pause it real quick because it turns out that what I was talking about earlier with the data, and I just want to get this out of the way before I forget, we've got a lot to cover here. Australopithecus Sediba is actually covered, and it is some newer evidence that has come to light in contested votes. So I want to read their take on it. So they point out, as this book goes to press, much of the buzz surrounding Sediba as a candidate ancestor to the genus Homo has gone silent. A Science article published in 2017 called the headline, "A Famous Ancestor May Be Ousted from the Human Family Tree." Ann Gibbon summarizes a recent analysis presented by Bill Kimball at the annual meeting for the American Association of Physical Anthropologists. Working together with Yoel Rack, Kimball notes that Sediba, MH1 juvenile skull, shares a striking resemblance to an already recognized species, Australopithecus africanus, and is therefore not our ancestor. Quote, "We do not believe that Australopithecus sediba has a unique relationship to the genus Homo." Bernard Wood, who has always been skeptical of Sediba, wholeheartedly agreed with Kimball's analysis, as did Ian Tattersall. Gibbon says it best: "A remarkably complete skeleton introduced in 2010 as the best candidate for the immediate ancestor of our genus Homo may just be a pretender." So here's the thing. I've even read the articles, read the paper for yourself. I've done a ton of reading in the last 24 hours, and I've got pages and pages of quotes. But one thing that is stated is that a lot of their traits that they look to, that they try and say Sediba is transitional, now they're saying that they would evolve independently. Okay, so because it's not in the Homo line, of course. But here's the thing: given the Tower of Babel event, given the pre-flood event, so according to our model of created heterozygosity, the most heterozygous ancestors would have been obviously at creation. You would have had a lot of variety, a lot of biodiversity, but you would have had a different world in the pre-flood world as well. So you would have had different adaptive events, of course, and then you have the flood. It was only one generation followed by rapid and exponential population growth. you would have had the most heterozygous ancestors at the point of the flood that would have embarked. Now, you'd expect some interesting variety, some interesting variation in your ape types. Now, I'm not saying this is the case, because I still hold to the position that Sediba, the data seems to suggest that your hominin, like Sediba, is an artificial species. And I'm going to cover that in a bit, so don't you worry. But your best case scenario, if you want to just agree to disagree, based on the data that we now know, that they're saying that these traits evolved independently, it's ousted as a direct human ancestor. It's not all that it's been made out to be and made out to sound like. So based on those environmental conditions, the levels of heterozygosity, ability to adapt and change, since they're saying that these changes occurred independently, well, given the morphological, anatomical, physiological, and genetic similarities to the ape types, humans and apes are a lot more similar than we are to any other form of life, then it would make sense that there are some similarities too. And that's just a possibility, of course. But I still hold to, and you're going to see that I think the evidence is pretty solid that it's an artificial species. But this new data that has come to light is quite fascinating. So, yeah, let's finish this video here.
Wide. And even though we can tell the difference between like a Croatian Neanderthal and a Russian Neanderthal and a Spanish Neanderthal, if you look at them together, they are less different as two people from Iceland.
Wow.
They're really, really inbred. Plus, the Neanderthals, they changed over time. The last Neanderthals are the classic Neanderthals. The earliest ones, they called them Homo heidelbergensis, who look a little more like modern man than Neanderthal does. So the end-stage Neanderthal is a super inbred, on their way to extinction group of people. Now, how they get so different? They might have started off different, just because early man could have been more diverse. They could have picked up a lot of mutations over time. Maybe inbred people just pick up lots of mutations. They could have been founded by a patriarch in his old age. And so therefore, a whole bunch of mutations, boom, start off already with a whole bunch of mutations. Or that mutation rate could have been higher in the past. Or, all these other ideas. I don't know necessarily what the answer is. But I'm comfortable saying they're human, and I'm laughing at the fact that in the 1800s, the thought that Neanderthal was human was, you might as well, I don't know. It would be a scientifically heretical statement to suggest at all that Neanderthal was human. They've always been, ape man, half ape, stupid, brutish, blah, 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 blah. But the archaeology is telling us that they're highly intelligent, they're highly invented, they had a diverse diet. They exploited their environment depending on where they were. They ate tuna fish. Tuna is an open water fish. That means Neanderthals had boats. And we know they had boats because they got to some of the islands in the Mediterranean that have never been connected to the mainland. They probably painted in caves. They made musical instruments. They had music. They buried their dead ceremonially, on and on and on and on. They're human beings. And now genetically we find out that we interbred with them, or they interbred with us. In fact, they're our ancestors. They're human. They're people. They're children of Adam.
Amen. He says it perfectly there. Children of Adam. So let's go to a claim made by Gutsick Gibbon. Okay, let's see. So right here, this is going to be worth a lot of discussion. Okay, so the screen's still shared. Want to make sure you can see this. Her video titled "Literally Over 3 Hours of Busting YouTube Creationists." It's that bad. Look how mean she is. I've been losing sleep over this. So, but we've been a little aggressive lately, so we're happy that she's also being aggressive. But at the end of the day, we like Erica. We're just debating the science, and we have no issues with her personally. So I do want to point out before I forget too, I really like I don't want to touch too much on the whole high confidence science versus low confidence science. I just want to point out that the fossil record is as low confidence science as you can get to, okay, for a number of reasons that I explained earlier. But I need to point this out that Dr. Rob Stadler points out in his book. It's a fascinating point, okay? So he says one of the world's foremost paleontologists, Jack Horner, presented a brilliant TED Talk in November 2011 entitled, "Where Are the Baby Dinosaurs?" He presented numerous impressive dinosaur finds, each classified as a separate species and bearing the name selected by its discoverer. He then pondered why we never find baby versions of the named dinosaurs. By cutting into the skull bones and performing microscopic analysis of bone structure, he was able to estimate the maturity of each animal at death. As a result, many separate dinosaur species turned out to be different levels of maturity of the same dinosaur species. Infants, adolescents, and adults of the same dinosaur species had been incorrectly classified as separate species. Let me read that again. Make sure everybody partying in the chat heard that. As a result, many separate dinosaur species turned out to be different levels of maturity of the same dinosaur species. This is just one of the many, many examples of the low quality and the low confidence nature of the fossil record. So, infants, adolescents, and adults of the same dinosaur species had been incorrectly classified as separate species. Horner explained that this occurred because scientists have egos, and scientists like to name things in order to obtain fame in the discovery of a new species. Remember, they always ask, how do you get all these millions of species? Well, we've covered how it's very simple. It's not even millions of species. But one thing to point out is nobody remembers the guy who found the let's say, fifth Stegosaurus or Tyrannosaurus Rex fossil. No, they remember the guy who found the first. So any little morphological difference, anatomical difference, they're going to say it's a different species, it's a new species, give it a new name. They got big egos, just like he said, you know, they want to get recognition. It's just so in so much interpretation, so much imagination. And the field itself is very competitive. So this is just the nature. It's insanely biased when it comes to the fossil record. So let's see here. This is a simple example of how bias can be a very powerful force whose influence can overwhelm the limited power of the tool of science in a field such as this. When addressing a hotly contested issue like evolution, the power of bias will be further amplified. So it's just a fact. The bias is there. The assumptions is there. It's indirect. All 6 of the criteria regarding whether something is high confidence science or low confidence science, the fossil record meets all of the criteria for low confidence science. So this is why we point out over and over again, it's genetics, it's biology. Genetics is what's inherited sperm and egg, and that's why we go into the non-recombining DNA like the Y chromosome, the mitochondrial DNA that reflects 2 ancestors in the not so distant past. Leads to testable predictions, retrodictions. We've covered that a ton in the past, but this is the point. Stadler continues, if bias could lead paleontologists to adopting the fallacy that a single fossilized species was actually several separate fossilized species, then a similar bias could lead paleontologists to adopt the fallacy that several distinct life forms with no evolutionary linkage represent an evolutionary sequence of life forms. So, that's just one part there that I wanted to point out. Interesting stuff when it comes to this fossil record. But let's listen to our good friend Erica here. Okay, boom. Hopefully you can hear.
It's nothing more than a conglomerate of the imagination.
Human missing link fossils may be jumble of species. Yes, this is from Barnes. I remember this one. I've seen this one from standing before. Barnes? I can't see it. There's a glare on my computer. From 2000.
Smash a bone shred of people.
Bone shreds. Let's see if. Okay, we can probably delete some of these tabs. We're getting a little tab heavy up top. Human missing link may just be jumble of species. Okay, let's see. Colin Beres. Okay, yeah, so wrong on that one. Okay. Image from Lee Berger. Okay, so this is even on Habilis. This is on Australopithecus Sediba. I think there are 2 different hominin genera represented at Malapis. It's Ellen Bean. That's it. It's Bean, Tel Aviv University. I remember this. I've discussed this with Stanley before. So Ella Bean rather did this analysis of Australopithecus Sediba, which is one of the other sort of linchpin transitionals that link the Australopithecus genus with Homo. And Bean essentially was like,
I am kind of jealous, I will say, of her fossils in the back there. Those are pretty cool. Maybe I'll have her send me one when we convert her to young Earth creation.
No, I think it's a mix of hominids. Bean's co-author has since retracted that. I don't know about Bean, but her co-author has since retracted that. We will look into this more at a later juncture. But love that.
Okay, so let's cover this one. So let's pull up. So the paper here, the lumbar spine of the Australopithecus sediba indicates 2 hominid taxa. I want to point out that both Ella Bean and Yoel Rack are not young Earth creationists. And even they've pointed out that Sediba appears to be 2 different species, Homo and ape. And what's funny is she wants to say that Yoel Rack has, actually I was speaking to her in the comment section today to see any real confirmation if he's actually retracted his claims. There's no claim by him. He may have. I doubt it though. But we don't want to put words in his mouth. But this paper is actually rock solid. You'll have to request it to read it all. But Ella Ben, from my understanding, she has not retracted. And to be honest with you, I don't think Yoel did either. They can claim that he did, and maybe he did. I don't think it matters anyways, because the fact is, it's such an inclusive field, paleoanthropology. It's so competitive. Not everybody's running around to try and disprove Sediba. So the fact that you have a couple paleoanthropologists here pointing out the fact that, yeah, what you're looking at here is an artificial species. You've got 2 hominid taxa. You're playing it off like it's 1. All you need is 1 or 2. So it doesn't matter if Yoel Rack from Tel Aviv University retracted his position here, but I doubt it, because this is a pretty rock solid paper here. So I'm looking here to see Ella Ben. I'm pretty sure she's the expert on this one anyway. So so evolutionary paleo experts Ella Ben and Yoel Rack, both from the Department of Anatomy and Anthropology at Tel Aviv University, presented their findings at the Paleoanthropology Society in Calgary, Canada. A brief summary of their findings have also been published in New Scientist. Okay, yeah. So Ella Ben is an expert in spinal anatomy and pathology. Let me say that again. The paper, the lumbar spine of Australopithecus sediba, indicates 2 hominid taxa. Ella Ben is the one who definitely hasn't retracted. I searched like crazy to see if that was the case. Ella Ben is the expert in spinal anatomy and pathology. Okay, so, and there's been no retraction. So let's keep going. After examining photographs taken of the fossil remains assigned to MH1 and MH2, Ben noticed that the lumbar vertebra of the adolescent male, MH1, looked strikingly similar to those of Turkana-boy. Turkana-boy is a Homo erectus specimen. Interesting, eh? With lumbar vertebra which are wider than they are tall, just as in modern man. On the other hand, the adult females, MH2, lumbar vertebra resembled those of apes, being similar to Australopithecines, which are taller than they are wide. Ben reports, according to our analysis, the spinal columns of the 2 skeletons represent 2 different hominid genera, Australopithecus and Homo. So you got an expert here in paleoanthropology, and then Erica, what she said in her video that I just showed, she said, these claims that they're artificial species, these claims that you oftentimes get Homo bones mixed in with the ape bones, Australopithecus bones. It's as if it's kind of funny when you think about it. It's like a human and an ape ran into each other and just exploded, died together, their bones got mixed. Well, it's not that simple, even though it's funny. So credit where credit is due, but that's not the case. And we're going to get into that a little bit more later as to why. But here's the thing. Experts here from paleoanthropology, they're admitting that this possibility is real. This is their conclusion. She's an expert on this. So she continues. Now I want to point out too, they'll say that creationists. So in Erica's first video on it, and maybe she just forgot to mention it, her first video on Habilis and Sediba, I watched the video. I was aware of this. She had no mention of it, made it look like I just made this up out of nowhere. And then I posted the article, not the paper, the article attached to this. And then she commented, and that's where she made the claim that one of them, as if it matters, supposedly retracted, but there's no evidence of that. But here's the thing. She should have brought this up in the, that maybe she didn't know about it. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the point is, creationists aren't just making up this whole artificial species concept. So anyways, Bin continues. We compared these ratios in the 4 lumbar vertebrae from Malapa to the ratios that characterize the lumbar elements of 75 modern humans. Now, this was an extensive study, okay? This is why I don't believe Ella Bin has retracted. I don't believe the other author has either. But I will say there's a lot of pressure. It's a very inclusive field, okay? Very competitive. And peer pressure oftentimes does make people change their views, change their minds, come out with new studies, retract previous statements, previous results. But oftentimes, okay, the new view is not better than the original view. Okay, oftentimes the original view is actually free from bias, when the new view has more bias, more assumptions attached to it. So you want to still, just because you hear somebody's retracted something, go in, read the papers, read the data, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the new view is actually correct. So Bin continues, and reading these, I know it's technical, maybe even a little bit boring, but this is directly addressing the arguments and the claims. So it's important, guys. Okay, so 75 modern humans, 2 Homo erectus specimens. Now remember the question, about Sediba, your major transitionals, show us bones of humans living in the same strata, same time, same bone beds. Well, here we got Erectus and Sediba. And even for sake of argument, let's just say this turned out to not be an artificial species. Okay, well, what you'll see is that they say it's common to find Homo and Australopithecus coexisting in the same places. So it's possible. It's a fact, okay? They can argue all day that Erectus is not human. It's clearly human for many reasons that we've covered. So, question answered. And a lot of times the evolutionists will get an answer to the question, but then they'll continue saying we haven't answered the question. No, they just don't like the answer, or they disagree with the answer, but don't say we haven't answered the question. They can agree. Heck, they can even say it's a storyboard. I don't care. But a lot of times the question has been answered. They just don't like the question. Okay, so where do we? Okay, 2 erectus specimens and 4 Australopiths. Our measurements indicate that the lumbar vertebra attributed to the Malapa specimen, MH1, fall within the range of Homo, whereas the lumbar vertebra attributed to the Malapa specimen, MH2, are similar to those found in Australopiths. Bin realized the remains discovered by Berger do not represent a single species. Oh, that's funny. It's not a young Earth creationist making this up. It's a paleoanthropologist who's an expert in the information in this paper regarding the lumbar spine. And it's not only that either. We'll keep going. This stuff's really fascinating. So, do not represent a single species. Instead, the remains belong to 2 different genera, Homo and Australopithecus. Bin concludes, the claim that Australopithecus sediba represents a transitional species between Australopithecus africanus and Homo stems from this mixture. The coexistence of Homo and Australopithecus, here we go. I'm not just making things up. Here we go. Let me read it. The coexistence of Homo and Australopithecus in early South African sites is not what? Is not unusual. This is commonplace. Come on, this is basic. As seen in fossils from the Schwartkrins Cave, probably butchered that one, and the nearby Sterkfontein Cave. Consistent with these findings, Joel Rack found that the unarticulated lower jaw bones are also of a different species. Also, it's not just, it's multiple bones that we're looking at. Lower jaw bones are also of a different species. The male jawbone, MH1, appears to be most similar to an Australopithecus, where the jawbone of the adult female, MH2, resembles that of a human. Funny, isn't it? Now we're not forced to change our position. We're not forced to retract things. We're not forced to force fit the data. This makes sense. Tons of anatomical contradictions. Anatomical contradictions make sense, those words. There's been critics that complain, oh, you know, that's just made up, or that's made up by the authors here of Contested Bones. Not the case, and we'll explain what that means a little bit more later. Okay, so the male jawbone appears to be most similar to an Australopithecus, where the jawbone of the adult female resembles that of a human. In noticing the thinness of the lower jawbone, Johansen notes, it's Homo. In agreement with the human-looking jawbone, the dentition attributed to MH2 is described as remarkably human-like, lacking pronounced canines characteristic of Australopithecines. Paleoanthropologist Daryl D. Reuter, author of a number of science papers covering Sediba, reports that the premolars of Australopithecus sediba plot within the ranges of Homo erectus and Homo sapiens dentitions, with mandibular molars that are small, similar to specimens attributed to early Homo. So this is the paper. Let's go. I hope I pulled it up here. Okay, so here's an article, more so, I guess, for the layman. Human missing link. Make sure you can see this in the chat. Good to see everybody. CIH says the Institute for Creation Research is also great to subscribe to. I agree, brother. I agree. Doki Doki, thank you so much for these super chats. Okay. Human missing link fossils may be jumble of species. And this is what I agree with. You know, this is my take on it. I think it's pretty obvious that this is the case. But I've also shown, if you want to agree to disagree, okay, because we're not going to argue about bones found in the dirt all day. There's no genetics. It's low quality, low confidence science. I can understand when it's your field, you know, this is, I guess, where you want to focus on. It's just, sometimes you just have to admit that, listen, you know, the field I'm in, the job I'm doing, this type of science, it's kind of low quality. It does resort to a lot of interpretation, a lot of storytelling, tough to say if it's true or false. So a lot of times it's the best inference. They'll say it's the best inference, but then it's oftentimes overturned. Okay, anyway, so let's keep reading here. One of our closest long-lost relatives may have never existed. The fossils of Australopithecus sediba, which promise to rewrite the story of human evolution, may actually be the remains of two species jumbled together. And I'm fine with this. I'm not going to argue against this. The first fossils of Australopithecus sediba were found at Malapa, South Africa in 2008. At 2 million years old, they show a mix of features similar to ape-like Australopithecines, others more like our genus Homo. Okay, let's keep going. Here we go. But a new analysis suggests Australopithecus sediba didn't exist. This is what we just went over. I think there are two different hominin genera represented at Malapa, says Elabin, at Tel Aviv University in Israel. Now, Elabin's not a kindergarten dropout, mind you. One is an Australopithecus and one an early Homo. We can't yet tell if the Australopithecine remains are distinct enough to call them a new species, Bin says. But Bin studies the spinal columns. Now, here's the thing. If Bin retracted it, you know, at the same time, I already told you there's a lot of peer pressure. The one who's being accused of retracting, it doesn't matter. Bin is the one studying the spinal columns. And I would say that none of them have retracted. Best case scenario, Yoel Rack, if I'm saying that correctly, the one that Erica is saying retracted, which there's no evidence that this was the case, no formal, I haven't seen any quotes or anything like that in blogs, articles, or any papers, technical papers. Something like that probably wouldn't be found in a technical paper, but at least in a blog or an article. Best case scenario, there may be a few bones attributed to Sediba that the one who's claimed to have retracted, I should say, look at like, okay, maybe this is an interesting Australopithecus type that has some mosaicism to it. That's the best case scenario. But, you know, this information is pretty rock solid. So definitely if any evolutionists want to request the paper itself, go through it, show where Elabin may be erroneous. But yeah, as creationists, we're fine with this because this is what the data really does look like. And we'll go over some of this more later. So Bin studies the spinal columns of ancient hominins. So she was curious when a paper was published last year focusing on the spine of Australopithecus sediba. There are fragments from 2 skeletons of Malapa, a juvenile male and an adult female. Looking at photographs of the vertebra, she noticed familiar features on the young male. I realized they look a lot like the vertebra of Neriokotomi boy, she says, also known as Turkana boy. So we talked about this. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so Ben shared her findings with Yoel Rack. This is the one they say retracted, which there's not really any evidence for, just very low-level evidence for that. But maybe somebody can reach out and see if that's the case. So it says, also at Tel Aviv University, she found an ally. In this very inclusive field, okay, where they assume human evolution happened, they're looking for the next big missing link. They've got government grants. The evolutionists want to laugh at this, but this is the case. There's a lot of competition to find the next big transitional form. To bushy mess, there's no more clarity. So retraction on something this big would not be surprising, I guess you could say. But given how strong the data is and how confident Ella Ben seems, I doubt this is the case. But regardless, I keep saying she, I'm not even sure. Ella Ben. Okay, so brought the findings, and yeah, so she found an ally. So now you got 2. But all you need is 1 or 2. Okay, in such an inclusive field, because not everybody's, we're not going to have, let's say, Gutsick Gibbon. Gutsick Gibbon is not going to go into this field to try and, disprove Sediba or anything like that. So the fact that she found this is fascinating stuff, and we should take it seriously. Okay, let's see. Good to see everybody in the chat. Hope everybody's doing well. All right. Oh, let's see. Doki Doki says, Bin got her name in the spotlight, but will she join the club with the pig tooth fraud? Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's see. Now, what's funny is that, so Yoel Rack, there's an ally here. He sees the same. Well, that's funny. I bet if you were to just get 10 that were open-minded and objective and really studied and looked into this, I bet you'd probably be getting way more conclusions like this. And I'm fine with this conclusion, and they can disagree all day. It doesn't really faze me, because it's low quality, low confidence science anyways. He sees the same in the lower jawbone, an Australopithecine and an early Homo, says Ben. But here the species are switched. A notch in the young male jaw looks like Australopithecus, while the same notch in the adult female jaw looks like human. The pair conclude there are not 2, but 4 individuals. Oh, that's funny. 4 individuals in the remains from Malapa, an adult and juvenile of both Homo and Australopithecus. They presented their findings. We talked about that earlier. This is what's funny. This was one of Gutsick Gibbon's arguments, okay? This one's funny. Unsurprisingly, Australopithecus sediba's discoverer, oh, big surprise here, Lee Berger of the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa doesn't agree. Oh, wow, the guy that found it, the guy that's hoping for fame when it comes to these big hominid finds, disagrees. Of course he's going to disagree. For one thing, he says the positioning of the adult skeleton's bones in the ground makes it likely they came from a single individual. Now, here's the thing. Those that want to hold on so badly to Sediba, for example, not being an artificial species, they're going to go look to Lee Berger's arguments, okay? But the expert here, and Lee Berger would be a paleo expert too, but Ben isn't convinced. Well, neither am I. I side with Ben. Fossils of other Australopithecine children had tall vertebrae, she says. And this is just a small line. Obviously, you get Ben and you get Lee Berger in a room, and they're going to hash it out, and maybe they'll still disagree at the end. So if there's a response video to this, the 2 arguments would be, one of the co-authors retracted, changed their minds. I highly doubt that's the case, but even if that was the case, it wouldn't matter for reasons we discussed before. Ella Ben, based on the results, it says it right here, Ben isn't convinced. Fossils of Australopithecine children had tall vertebrae, she says. And it's been an extensive review, and, there's going to be good arguments from both sides. But the thing is, Lee Berger in this specific case seems like he'd have more to lose and more to admit than Ella Bin. Okay, so regardless, Berger says, yeah, so of course Berger is going to disagree. So my other prediction would be that the criticizers, probably Erica, would be using Lee Berger's assessment as a response. So let's go back to, so here's the paper. What do we got here? Okay. Let's go over some stuff here, okay? So here's what's funny. More things they won't point out, okay, on human evolution, and just low confidence science. But we got to deal with it because we at Standing for Truth, we want to deal with every argument. So we're trying to make this as entertaining as possible, guys. But we've done so many videos on genetics yet, and we haven't had any response. We've got a number of questions. I don't mind doing this. I don't mind doing a number of series on this until we actually get some rebuttals to our genetics and biology related data. The genetics, it's fascinating stuff. Apparently there will be a response video. And if there is, Ram, Matt, and myself are going to take it apart sentence by sentence. So, but until then, I mean, there's no sense in us rehashing definitely check the playlist. I mean, you're looking at over 20 videos of in-depth information on evidence for independent origins, Adam and Eve. So, okay, let's see this here. January 2018. Observations made in a recent article by leading paleo experts confirm several major points in contested bones. Oh, and I want to point out too, because Erica points out in her last video that, you know, there are some articulated bones too, right? And that's fine. But here's the thing. The majority proves the rule, and they always want to look to the exception. Well, the thing is, you can get quote after quote after quote. I'm not going to bore the audience with it, but every article I read, every paper I read, every book I read on human evolution, I do have books on human evolution to understand both points. They talk about how fragmented it is, how incomplete it is, how partial it is, what a mess it is. Okay, yeah, you will have some articulated bones as well. You're not, for the most part, going to have genetics there. And your articulated bones, let's say when it comes to Sediba and Habilis, chances are you can probably tell if it's articulated, if it's an ape or a human. But when you get to the fragments, when you get to the pieces, when you get to the mixing, okay, this is where we have the major issues. So I agree. There's always an exception to the rule, but we should still focus on the rule, and you shouldn't make the exception your argument, okay? Just having exceptions to the rule as arguments all day long isn't going to cut it. Okay, so let's see here. A leading paleo expert of George Washington University and Wood and Michael Westaway, Senior Research Fellow, Australian Research Centre for Human Evolution. The article confirms several major themes of the book Contested Bones. So let's have a look. This is best. We always keep ourselves updated, okay, guys? So you want to, like, I mean, I'm reading stuff on 2020, 2019. This is a good site too. If you miss something, they throw it up on here. So they're up to date. That's why a lot of the people the evolutionists that we're taking on, most of them, 99.9%, don't even know about the article in the paper I just covered for 30 minutes, okay? And I suspect, and it might not be the case, I don't like to put words in people's mouths, but the fact that Erica didn't talk about it in her verse video and I commented with it, okay, and then TD Lane came to the rescue, I've already, I feel, refuted the arguments that they use, and I predicted what their future arguments could be. They may look at it as a stalemate, I don't know, but a lot of people aren't up to date with this evidence, and evolutionists especially, which is a problem. So, confirmed observation 1. Paleo anthropology is a field in deepening crisis. With every new discovery, the ape-to-man story becomes ever more complicated, ever more convoluted, and simultaneously calls all previous claims into question. This is true. Did humans arise in East Africa, South Africa, Europe, or Asia? Leading experts just don't know anymore. Wood and Westaway write, the question of where we humans come from is one many people ask. And the answer is getting more complicated as new evidence is emerging all the time. Isn't that funny? Let's see here. One of the many new pieces of evidence they cite that throws the story into greater turmoil is the finding of human artifacts and bones from Jebel Arud in Morocco. The evidence is cited in an update listed in our November 2017 update. Let's see what it says. The original story went something like this. Modern humans evolved in their current anatomical form in sub-Saharan Africa sometime after 200,000 years ago. They hung around for a bit, then groups started... Let's see. Get distracted by the chat. Let's see. Nicholas says, if you do the build a hominid thing more, maybe it should be Gorilla Glue. It's true. Build your own hominid this Christmas. And as you can see here by the paper in the article that we just covered, build a hominid stands, okay? Because the critics aren't liking that. But it's a fact. And even the paleo experts are noticing, okay? And like I said, 1 or 2 come out with these findings. That's all you need, given the nature of paleoanthropology, okay? So, a new analyses of human fossils have pushed back our earliest recognizable modern ancestors to around 310,000 years. And they weren't found in Eastern or Southern Africa like previous fossil finds, but from a site called Jebel in Morocco. These findings have raised questions regarding exactly how and where we became modern. Where did we humans come from some 40 or so years ago? Our origins seem quite straightforward. Look at this, quite straightforward. But now we see that the human story is far more complex. Yeah, when you have a false starting point, when you reject the Babel event, if you just got here, definitely watch the beginning of the video where I read through my section in my human evolution book on the Babel and the predictions, the expectations. This is what they reject. And this is why they're misinterpreting the data. And this is why they say things like this. But now we see that the human story is far more complex. They're coming to wrong conclusions because of the wrong presuppositions and wrong assumptions. Look at this. Confirmed observation 2. Recent DNA analyses continue to confirm that all the reputed Homo species proposed by taxonomic splitters all coexisted, intermingled, and interbred. Based on the biological species concept, this is the best possible confirmation that they're all fully human Homo sapiens. This is interesting. Langley writes, perhaps the most intriguing new evidence comes from the analysis. Doki doki, thanks so much. Take this bone, outstanding. We can glue this one. Doki doki says, I like it. Okay, so let's read this. These studies are showing that interactions between the new humans, modern humans like you and me, and the old humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, that are all now extinct. Now, isn't it funny how they're going to look at these so-called Australopith-like features, or features they say are basal, or features they say are primitive or pre-human? I mean, these are all living at the same time. They're all coexisting, which is exactly what we would expect. And remember, your domestic dog, like the pit bull and the shih tzu, cannot live before the wolf. They can live at the same time. They can't live before. We can't live before our great-great-great-grandfather, okay? Look at this. This is funny. Instead, it appears that groups of new and old humans intermingled, interbred, fought, and interacted in a multitude of different ways, which we are still disentangling. Langley's observation is in complete agreement with numerous other experts in the field who have described the various Homo variants. Once again, Neanderthals, Denisovans. Say these 10 times fast whenever you get one of these new names, and you'll master it. But they're not always easy to say. Hobbit and Elidi as being part of a large interbreeding meta population. Look at this. If you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, it's kind of like Lord of the Rings. You know, you got Middle Earth, you got the elves, you've got the orcs, you've got the humans, you got the trolls, you've got all of these different so-called species living at the same time. But for us, it's just clear that these are all different Homo variants, okay? Thus, all the reputed Homo species coexisted, interacted, and interbred. But remember all the data that suggests the Australopithecines also lived with the Homo genus. Look, Erectus, let me highlight this. Erectus, constantly claimed as coexisting with your Australopithecines. Bin, even if Erica wants to disagree with Bin's conclusion or say that Yoel retracted, you can't ignore the point that Bin admitted that this was commonplace, that they were found together, homogeneous, you know. And this is just one of her questions. I mean, go on for 10 hours, which is why I said this can be a 10-part series. Good for business. So I want to thank Gutsick Gibbon that. Good for business, guys. We have job security here on Standing for Truth. We could probably do a video a night It may even get to the point where we can do a video in the morning, evening, and nighttime, 3 a day. Okay, so thus all the reputed Homo species coexisted, interacted, and interbred. These findings argue against the claims made by splitters that these various hominins are separate species of man. These findings further confirm that there is no discernible, see here, their failed prediction, no discernible evolutionary progression, okay? Because you can watch one of Erica's other videos where she goes into the nature of the traits, what we'd be looking for, right? More basal, millions and millions of years ago, of course, versus more derived versus more human like we see today. And points to features. Now, here's the thing. Any one of these features, and I'm going to cover this later, any one of these so-called features that they say are primitive or they say are pre-human can be attributed. Okay, we've seen it in humans today. It can be attributed to pathology. Now, remember, it's not like we see somebody, a human today, in isolation with some disease or pathology that has led to some type of deformity. And then we take that bone or feature that is deformed due to some type of pathology and disease and then compare it to a normal human that's living today. Okay, yeah, we can easily differentiate between that. Okay, but in the fossil record, when it comes to these pre-humans, these entire subpopulations have these distinguishing features. That's because of founder effects, generations and generations and generations of inbreeding, accelerated genetic degeneration, island dwarfism, you name it. This can lead to those traits becoming fixed in the whole population. Okay, so it's not comparable to what I'm saying today like we could do. Therefore, they will interpret it as primitive, Australopith-like, when in fact it's a wrong interpretation. What they're looking at is low confidence science, okay? The inference is only as good as the data would suggest, okay? It's not incredibly empirical, and it fits better with our model because right here, as you can see, coexistence is the rule, including the Australopithecines. Look at this one. Even if you don't want to agree that Homo habilis is also an artificial species, okay, let's see this. Homo habilis is now largely rejected by paleo community as a credible human ancestor. There is growing suspicions that habilis should never have been included in the genus Homo to begin with. The overall body plan of habilis is most closely resembles the apish Australopithecines. That's why my point is the ones that would be articulated for the most part versus the ones that are fragmented. The ones that are easier to interpret would probably be, as I've said, more Australopithecine-like. Do I believe that some Homo bones have been mixed in and misinterpreted, which means they could easily fit together, okay, like a puzzle? It's not difficult. Yes, I do. But that seems to be the case. But regardless, even here, once again, everything's contested, even if you want to agree to disagree. What is acknowledged in nature that habilis is too unlike erectus to be considered an evolutionary precursor to man. Paleo experts Wood and Westaway reaffirms this observation in their latest article. Some researchers think that Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis are not different enough from the Australopiths that preceded them to justify being included in the genus Homo. There is a developing consensus that the relaxation of the criteria more than 50 years ago that saw the inclusion of Homo habilis into the genus Homo needs to be reconsidered. But you can go on and on here. I mean, there's tons and tons of good evidence that shows what a mess, what an absolute mess paleoanthropology is. Okay, let's go to one of these videos that I have here. So once again, why morphology fails. We've covered that. Let's go here. You know what, let's show, this one was a good video. Watch this for a bit, guys. Some good points here. Homo habilis falsified as a human. Rather, humans ate them. Okay. So let's, because remember, it comes down to the interpretations, and interpretations can be wrong. Inferences can be wrong on low confidence science. So
The human icons that supposedly show humans evolving from ape-like creatures over millions of years. After the icon named Lucy, which evolutionists place in the 3 to 4 million years ago time slot, the next ape-to-human icon is Homo habilis. This creature fits into evolution's timeline about 1.4 to 2.4 million years ago, taking the slot right before Homo erectus appears on the scene. Before looking at this icon, let's consider something very interesting about this stage in evolution's timeline. According to the current theory of human evolution, the time slot between 2 and 3 million years ago has almost no fossil evidence to support it. This National Geographic article puts it this way: fossils attributed to Homo in the period 2 to 3 million years ago are exceedingly rare. They quote Dr. Kimball, director of the Institute of Human Origins at Arizona State University, who said, "You could put them all into a small shoebox and still have room for a good pair of shoes. It's hard to imagine evolution pressing ahead for 1 million years with only a shoebox of bones to show for it. That's a long time to go without any supposed transitions between apes to humans." Let's consider the extent of the fossil evidence that exists for human evolution. Charles Darwin postured that if evolution was true, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. He also questioned, why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth? We agree. If human evolution was true, wouldn't we expect the ground to be filled with numerous transitions between ape-like creatures? We agree with Darwin that the lack of transitions is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged.
So I want to point out that the best they can do is provide us the exception to the rule. I point out all the time that what we would expect based on the design perspective are some interesting mosaics. We see that human engineers build exactly that, okay? Especially for adaptive purposes, environmental purposes. This is the exception, though. We should be seeing it. There should be so many transitional forms out there that it's just unquestionable, undeniable. Yet they have like a select few that we can argue about all day. Tiktaalik, Archaeopteryx, the mammal-like reptiles, for example. And when it comes to the human evolution, you can argue all day about Sediba. I just covered for 30 minutes paleoanthropologists that suggest that it is a mix. And even if you just want to agree to disagree, being a critic, well, it's been ousted as a direct descendant or a direct transition anyways from Homo sapiens. And they've even stated that those traits have evolved independently. Fancy that. So you're out of luck. Then they're left with Habilis because Neanderthalensis, Erectus, Floresiensis, Naledi, Luzonensis, the Australopithecines. Like, for example, the Australopithecines, when it comes to like Lucy species, Afarensis, these Australopithecines, most of their features are shared with living apes today, okay? They're extremely short, like 3 or 4 feet tall. They got long arms and short legs, ape hands and feet. They've got the long curved fingers, toes are opposable, thumb-like toes, ape-sized and ape-shaped skulls, funnel-shaped rib cages with high-placed shoulders for suspensory behavior. But the point is, what are they? Well, yeah, they've got some uniqueness in their morphology, which makes sense because guess what? They're extinct. They would have lived in a time, of course, with environmental conditions unlike we see today. It would have been the post-flood world, pre-Babel. Maybe they went extinct sometime post-Babel. But here's the point. The best conclusion is that they're apes and they're nothing more than just an extinct ape genus. If they lived today, that's all that they would be considered. Another ape genus, another ape type. So there's nothing special about them. So yeah, now they just want to sit here and they have their final two that they want to hold on to, that they can't give up on, like Sediba or, but yet there should just be so many where we just can't deny the evidence. But you've only got an exception. Evolutionists love the exception to the rule. You'll notice that. Pay close attention. The exception to the rule is oftentimes their main argument.
Against the theory of evolution. Even Ian Tattersall, emeritus curator with the American Museum of Natural History, noted that you could fit all the supposed ape-to-human fossil evidence into the back of a pickup truck if you didn't mind how much you jumbled everything up.
Look at that. You can fit it all into the back of a pickup truck if you didn't mind how much you jumbled everything up. This is constantly reiterated in the paleo literature. Okay. I was just watching a lecture series by Lee Berger. Okay. And he even discussed, and they're very recent. He even pointed out how little they know. You know, he held up this massive femur. Okay. Maybe I'll link it in the description because the evolutionists might enjoy to watch it. This huge femur, just bedazzled, flabbergasted, you know, what it all means. There's still so much they have to find. There's still so many unanswered questions, less clarity. I mean, they're admitting this. Now, don't expect them to admit all of these problems when they're making like a rebuttal video or an anti-creationist video. They don't want to give their audience the perception that there are so many problems, but there really are. I can't emphasize this enough. If their best, quote unquote, line of evidence is low confidence science, okay, it doesn't meet the criteria for high confidence science, you better just get something else. And then when they go to genetics and biology, this is why they struggle so much to address the data, to counter the data.
With centuries of recorded history and over 7 billion interfertile humans on the planet today, we should certainly have more than a truck bed of fossil evidence if evolution was true. Inventing a new icon, Homo habilis, hasn't helped with the scarcity problem at all. In fact, did you know that they've never even discovered
Another good point too. I pointed out, why are there so few fossils? Why are there so few erectus if they're on the earth for a million years? Should be billions of dead bodies. And our critic, Erica, pointed out, well, why are there so few like triceratops or dinosaur fossils? Well, this is easy. We're pointing out that there's so few fossils because we haven't been around for hundreds of millions of years. What we actually find in terms of fossils perfectly is consistent with the global flood and then the immediate post-flood world, the ice age that followed, those harsh environmental conditions where survivorship was at play, stress, pathology, disease. It was a tough world. The rekindling of culture, for example. You know, this would have been a time where fossilization would take place as well. And this is where we find your hominids, your human variants, okay? This is exactly what we'd expect in the fossil record. What we find is what we'd expect. But if for hundreds of millions of years we've been evolving, okay, there should be a lot more. So I kind of laughed at that question because it was like, okay, you know, the obvious is it's because we haven't been here for hundreds of millions of years. So here we go. Keep going.
the Homo habilis skeleton? This species was invented to categorize bone pieces, which total less than 100, into an ape-to-human transitional form they believe was becoming more handy with stone tools, hence the name handyman. While they've never found anything even close to a complete Homo habilis creature, that hasn't stopped them from displaying complete human-looking versions of it in museums and textbooks everywhere. In fact, the best set of bones they have for this icon, which they refer to as the official type specimen, consists of just a jawbone with 13 teeth, a molar, a couple of skull fragments, and finger, hand, and wrist bones. The bones from this best type set of Homo habilis were found spread out over a 1,300 square foot area and were mixed with cow, pig, horse, tortoise, catfish, and bird bones that were also widely scattered over this entire area. After further study, however, evolutionists found that this defining specimen turned out to be a mixture of bones from different animals, with 6 of the 21 finger bones belonging to a different creature, one of the finger bones mistaken for a vertebral fragment, and 2 others belonging to a monkey. While the limited fossils belonging to this new Homo habilis icon were found with stone tools, evolutionists cannot be certain whether the stones were used by Homo habilis or used on Homo habilis by humans. They were in fact found broken apart and scattered over a 1,300 square foot area, just like all the other butchered animal bones in the region. Sure seems like humans were eating these creatures, along with a lot of other types of animals. Think about the tools they found for a moment. The tools they discovered included choppers, polyhedrons, discoids, and many small tools like scrapers. The problem for evolutionists is that most of these tools were made from rocks that were quarried miles away from where they were used to butcher the dozens of animals found at the site, where thousands of animal bones were found pulled apart and unattached. Whoever used these tools knew what they were doing because they were all hand-sized, and most of them were made from a certain type of rock called quartzite, which can be flaked to a razor-like edge. Your average person today would have a really hard time making these tools. After identifying the right kind of rock, the rock has to be shaped using percussion and pressure tools, like pointed hammer stones and cylindrical hammers, like long bones. Plus, you've got to know how to make different types of tools for the various steps of removing food sources from animals, like meat and bone marrow. But the clues don't end with stone tools. The evidence that humans were actually the inhabitants of this site is also confirmed by a 12-foot circular foundation made of lava stones for a hut shelter they found in the same archaeological bed where Homo habilis bones were found. Paleo experts even describe this circular stone foundation as having a striking similarity to the dome-shaped hut shelters still made today by nomadic people in the same area. But it gets even better. They actually found the stone circle in a layer beneath Homo habilis bones. Now, that's not faring well for the theory of evolution, because whoever was there working with tools and building huts was on the scene before Homo habilis even showed up.
There'd be your humans right there. This is some good information.
Up in the fossil record. This is exactly the opposite of what we would expect if evolution was true. The 300.
Now remember, they're always talking about predictions. This is what we'd predict. When they're constantly acting surprised. Oh, there's less clarity. Oh no, we need to come up with this post hoc, ad hoc rescue device. There's these predictions. Now, if they make millions of predictions, one or two are bound to come right. But for the most part, what we're looking at here is this is what results from low confidence, low quality science. It's just a fact.
48 animal bones they found scattered around the hut included species from the croc, cow, hippo, elephant, horse, tortoise, giraffe, and pig families. And do you know how many they found inside the stone hut circle? Only 11 small fragments, which were mostly toes and teeth. Seems like the leftover pork chops were being thrown outside the living area. The other clue that this site was being inhabited by humans is that 48 of the 50 pieces of debitage, which are the leftover pieces of rock that get removed when stone tools are made, were found outside the stone hut foundation. Sounds like a human living area to me, according to Mary Leakey, the lead paleo expert.
But isn't it funny how they say, well, what happened? Did some Australopithecus and some human run into each other and break apart? What I want to know is who gave the Australopithecus, who gave the ape a bomb to get all their bone fragments all over the place where they got to go a mile down this way and a mile this way and get two bones and say, hey, look, these fit together. Like, who gave the ape the bomb? It's more so a joke. The evolutionists might use that against me as an argument. Just a joke, but kind of funny in a way. But here's what's funny. This is the evidence that we see. We can see this today. Humans eat apes. Humans eat monkeys. Humans have always eaten all sorts of things in desperate types of situations. Everything that we see, like I said, please, if you just got here, the beginning's important, where I've gone through the evidence that suggests that what we're looking at is post-Babel, the outer Middle East. And everything during this time period, the survivorship, the pathology, the disease, the stress, okay, the conquest, the rekindling of culture, okay, this is exactly what we see, and this is where they are totally interpreting it wrong.
Expert over the site, the main evidence that the stone hut foundation was an artificial.
Point is, there's so many reasons why you'd find Homo bones mixed with Australopithecus bones or ape bones. Especially if, as bad as it is, what were the food sources? Survival must have been. It's not like it is today where we get to sit at home, do these streams, sit in the comfort of our own home. It was a tough time period. So these kind of rhetorical questions or arguments that they're using just don't seem to fit. They don't seem to work.
Structure, like man-made, were the 6 mounds of heaped rocks around the circle that were evidently used for support poles. She also remarked about the disproportionate number of bones and tools they found outside the hut and not inside, along with a 2-foot buffer zone around the circle that was mostly clear.
So you've got tools, but then you've also got a mix of what looks like Homo bones and ape bones, maybe it's humans that are living there. They're the intelligent ones. They're the ones using the tools. They're the ones that are, for the most part, in control. They're the ones that are building. And then you've got a lot of animals, or you've got some apes. Therefore, the tools should be attributed to probably Homo erectus, okay? But yet they want to attribute it to some ape/human hybrid or something, It's just kind of ridiculous.
Here of tools and bones. The other amazing insight offered by the Leakeys, the very scientists who discovered Homo habilis, is that they found fossil evidence leading them to believe that Australopithecus, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus all lived at the same time. So
once again, I need to emphasize this fact because the evolutionists don't seem to want to. The coexistence of all your Homo genus, Neanderthalensis, Floresiensis, Naledi, Luzonensis, Erectus, you name it, Naledi, but also the Australopithecines, okay? This was a time where the coexistence, the intermingling would result in these types of situations and finds, and this is what we find today. And, it's exactly what we'd expect based on a post-flood world, a Babel event, the conditions and state of the post-Babel world. There's no reason for creationists to have to reinterpret the data. And then once you get into the direct lines of evidence, the high quality, the high confidence science, like the genetics, as Aaron Ross said, morphology and anatomy when it comes to bones can oftentimes deceive us. And when we look to the genetics, we can easily separate humans into their own kind.
how is one species supposed to evolve into another over millions of years if the fossil evidence points to them living at the same time? Their position has perplexed many other evolutionary scientists, but they reported what they found. All three species discovered living at the same time. Now, all this data about Homo habilis isn't holding up the theory of evolution very well. First, we have the issue of the really limited data, with fewer than one.
Now, I want to point out, just so the argument isn't brought up again, there are some articulated bones, but I think everybody will agree that for the most part, the rule is fragments, disarticulation. You know, there's some that are in situ, for example, as they would say, but a lot of what you're looking at and you're trying to piece together is fragments. And where there is full articulation, I'm telling you, this is where we can conclude that this is an ape or this is a human type. This is why the fact is, even though they don't want to agree with it, the Australopiths were apes, okay, but there were certain isolated bones. I'll say that again, the isolated bones, those are the ones that are incorrectly assigned to Australopiths, which are indeed human. And also we can find the tools, we can find the footprints that are also attributed to the Australopiths. So yeah, there were Australopithecines, of course, but some of which is attributed to the Australopithecines belong to humans, like the tools and the bones. So
100 bone pieces ever found. Then we have the obvious signs of human nomadic tribes living in the area who were setting up camp, living in huts.
I don't think anybody, evolutionists and creationists alike, is going to disagree with the fact that reconstructions are very much common with these fragmentary bones. And guess what? These constructions, these reconstructions, it falls under the low confidence science because it requires a lot of inference and a lot of assumptions. They're assuming ape to man evolution. They're obviously not assuming young earth creation, special creation, independent origins. That means the paleontologists believe in evolution before they reconstruct the data. They believe things like Lucy would have walked upright, among other things, right? They're looking for a mixture of human and ape bones, for example. So they're going to base their reconstructions off of this primary assumption. You know, this is kind of just basic when it comes to, you know, just me spending as much time as I have studying these, reading their own literature, reading their own books. They admit this. Yeah, you're going to get an exception. You know, I don't want to see the exceptions.
Making specialized hand tools, using special rocks found miles away, and butchering and eating animals, including apes, just like people have been doing for thousands of years.
There you go. Just like people have been doing for thousands of years. No, an ape and a human didn't run into each other. They were going out for a jog. Oops, boom. You know, it's funny. It gave me a good laugh when it was Gutsick Gibbon who said that. But the fact is, humans have been eating nearly everything, as bad as it is, for thousands of years, including apes. They've been eating animals. Okay? Therefore, yeah, you will find their bones in the sites where humans lived or habitated at, or, you know, there's a number of reasons. In that type of world where stress and survivorship and conquest and, you know, it would not be a fun time for us to live in, put it that way.
Years. Looking for answers about what the Bible teaches about creation, the fossil record, dinosaurs? Download the Genesis Apologetics app from the iTunes or Google Play stores for
Okay, let's go to another video that I want to get to as well on the foramen magnum, which is a good one. Maybe I don't have it here, which means we will go find it over here. So I want to point out, though, about the foramen magnum. When it comes to, okay, so we'll find the video. Boom, here it is. So this is the one I'll click. When it comes to the foramen magnum, it actually, when it comes to Lucy, when you actually allow for size differences, okay, between living apes today, like the gorilla and the Australopithecines, especially Australopithecus afarensis, there's major size differences. You know, these Australopithecines, for example, let's just focus on Lucy, who's about 3 or 4 feet tall. Look at the size of a gorilla today. So when you actually allow for size differences regarding Lucy and a living gorilla, guess what? The Australopithecine and the gorilla's foramen magnum are nearly identical. Okay, I mean, Lucy had locking wrists like a quadruped apes and not humans. Another thing is Lucy's shoulder joint is cranially oriented, and in modern humans, it faces mainly upwards. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, the Australopithecines, you know, they had some uniqueness to it. And that's why if they were to live today, okay, as I said earlier, they would just be considered, like, for example, we point out all the time that in the past there would have been a greater diversity, which means there would have been a greater diversity of ape types, okay? Extinction is real. And this has happened in the past, even according to our model. So the living great apes include pan, okay, or chimpanzee, for example, gorilla, pongo, orangutan. Now, if these Australopithecines were not extinct and they were alive today, they'd just be considered a fourth hominid genus. Nothing that's ancestral or nothing that's pre-human evolving into human. No, you know, that's not the case. All 4 genera share many sets of features, some unique to their own genus, and yet still obviously all apes. So, but yeah, let's put this one to bed too. This is a good video. Oh, we'll start at the beginning. Okay, here we go.
Okay, this is what we see today. This is the foramen magnum, which just means big hole. This is in the base of the spine, comes into the skull. Now, right here is the very middle. And the reason it's in the middle is because of bipedalism, right? This is the center balance. This is the center of gravity, and it's the easiest to balance our skull on this. In primates, it's usually found in the back because they walk on all 4s. And the orbital tilt makes it so that they should be able to see forward when they walk. We need to look a little bit down. So that's the difference. All right. Now here is where it gets interesting. This is also a human. Look at that. Very back of the skull. Now you can see why. Look at that. Elongated skull. You see what happened? In Peru, they bound their skull. And when you bind the skull and you allow it to grow, the weight shifts and the burden of the skull has now shifted into the back. So what happens is in the lifetime of a human being, it shifts. It's not over decades, it's not over years, it's an epigenetic regulation that takes effect in the lifetime of the person. Here's another Peruvian skull that's not elongated, and it's where ours is today, right in the middle. But yet this person lived at the exact same time, in the exact same place, in the same part of the world, eating the same foods, talking the same language. Now, why is that? Notice that you have to align the skull, even with these little coasters, in the back so that they lean forward far enough for the human to even see, in a very different position than humans have it today because of this weight.
Wrapping the skull, binding the skull with material to elongate it from youth onward. Yes.
Exactly. Now remember, they said this is only found in primates, and as they evolved, this hole evolved and slowly moved forward towards the center. Now we know from epigenetics that this is not true. We can clearly see it in humans, in South America, and many places in the world. Not just there, but you can clearly see it in the back of the skull when they do cranial binding. Here is a modern day skull. Here's the Peruvian skull. Look at, I would love to see the one on this skull. That's incredible. But just have a couple examples. And then I have even, I showed this one twice, my bad. And then I have another couple examples. Here's an infant, cranial bound, lived for about a year and a half. And here's the eyes and the mouth. I highlighted it so you can see. And the skull is bound. Now look at where the spinal cord enters the skull. Already it's shifting to the back for balance, even though this infant is very young. Here's an adult going into the back of the skull, a little impeded because of the hair. Here's a living human being with an elongated skull. As you can see, the neck is very, very different in its positioning, trying to incorporate the new weight of the skull. This is from a video. I don't have any sound because I just wanted the visuals for you guys to see. He is holding a modern human skull that's been cranial bound in a modern day right here, and then ancient right here. Look at that. In the far back, exactly where it would be in a primate, yet this is a human. And it changed in the very lifetime of that human being. Not over generations, not over thousands of years, and not even millions of years, in one lifetime. So we have multiple examples now of this so-called best evidence for evolution, the foramen magnum being in the middle for humans, and slowly over generations and different speciation rates and different things like Sahelanthropus sagensis, for example, where it's a little bit closer than the other ones. Well, look at this, a regular human being, no different from anybody else in the far back because they bound their skull. Did their parents have this? No, unless their parents bound their skull, they didn't. So why would it be there if it's so easily changed? According to evolution, it shouldn't be easily changed. It takes millions and millions of years to slowly adjust to bipedalism. Yet here's a modern day human walking around that adjusted to the back in one lifetime. Can you guys see this one?
Okay, so interesting stuff there. I touched a bit on the foramen magnum before we went into that video, but I want to, like I said, we'll probably do a 100-part series on this because there's just so much data to go over, and we've already been going on for a couple hours and I'm already losing my voice, but I do want to cover a couple things here. Definitely though, go check out the Ella Bin and Yoel Rack paper. The lumbar spine of Australopithecus sediba indicates 2 hominid taxa, or at least read the article. And let's see, I'm going to go back to, I know I had a couple other papers I wanted to screen share here. Good to see, even at 4 a.m. in the morning, we've got 23, 24 people in the chat. That's why I love my viewers. You're party animals like me, night owls. Then again, a lot of you are on different times as well. So, okay, so let's see. We've got, I always find this funny because the data that they want to focus on are the ones that are just so incomplete. And they don't want to admit it. We touched on in the RN Raw video for 3.5 hours, but we touched on Artipithecus and how crushed the hip was. But it's just funny when we've got nearly complete skeletons. Of course, when we got the genetics, we can easily conclude whether or not it's human, whether or not it is ape. Okay, provide a single example of human bones being found That is to say, in the same layer as existing transitional species. So you guys can see that that question had a long answer because there's just so much evidence of all the coexistence of all of these different ape types, human types. Okay, I want to address a couple things here. I want to see quote-wise, if there's any I want to throw out here. I want to point out, too, Todd Wood, who is a creationist, he does a lot of baraminology work. Now, he oftentimes has conflicting conclusions and interpretations with other young Earth creation scientists, but he's really looked at the data, okay? And the evolutionists can't say that he's not being honest with the data, but he's even quoted. He says in one of his papers on Sediba, he says, before discussing these criticisms, we should recall that any creationist analysis of fossil hominids is inherently difficult. Okay, let's see why. Important hominid fossils are extremely fragmentary and only known from a few individuals oftentimes, like Sediba. Let's see here. So this is just the nature of it all. You know, they need to own it. They need to embrace it. They need to embrace how low quality and how low confidence this field is. He says, any conclusions about fossil hominids, especially those on poorly known taxa, can only be considered tentative. And he goes on to talk about how most fossils are inherently difficult to classify because they are partial, they are fragmentary, and there's only a few of them. This is just the case. This is just the facts. But another thing I really wanted to point out too is how essential it is to understand the out of Middle East model when looking to the findings with the hominid fossil record, for example. Now, I want to point out with, let me see. Yeah, see, I'm just looking at all these quotes and I'm like, you know, should I read them all? I think you guys get the point now. Okay. What we're looking at is pretty low quality. Now, here's the thing. As we talked about, many of the troubling human fossils are better understood to be devolution, okay, rather than evolution. We've pointed out the fact that any of these primitive features, any of these so-called pre-human-like traits that somebody like Erica would point to, we can see it in the Homo floresiensis, erectus, naledi, neanderthalensis, whatever. It doesn't show that they were pre-human tribes, okay? Better understood when it comes to the so-called pre-humans. I'm saying they were made in the image of God. They were human tribes that were persistently inbred and were in genetic decline. But remember, founder effects are at play, genetic fixation. These subpopulations, these traits, these deformities, they are fixed in the population, okay? This is why they can oftentimes be interpreted incorrectly by the evolutionists to be primitive or Australopith-like when it's not the case. Plus, they all coexisted, so they can't say that, well, this is what we predicted, some nice, clean line of progression from more basal and primitive to more human-like. It's just not the case, not going to work. So we could point out a human being today in isolation, as I said earlier, that has pathology and disease and make that distinction, since this is not the case for the human population as a whole today. When it comes to these so-called pre-humans that we are looking at, are entire subpopulations of humans, okay? So I just want to emphasize that fact, since I anticipate that would be one of the results. But the thing is, they oftentimes misrepresent the types of diseases, too, that would be associated with this, okay? Because we're looking at island dwarfism, reductive evolution, diseases such as cretinism, mechanical stress. Natural selection in these times would be making the species as strong as it can be by focusing on the short term, okay? It's not worried about getting cancer in 50 years. It's worrying about surviving till tomorrow. Survivorship. You know, Gutsick Gibbon tried to say that I misrepresented the Trinkhouse paper, you know, when all his other conclusions are exactly what we always say would have been the case in the Babel world. Stress, survivorship, disease, pathology, okay? Natural selection would have been huge. This process of natural selection and thus reductive evolution would result in small body size, smaller brain sizes, etc. There is no, okay? And I keep repeating this, there is no so-called primitive feature that can be pointed to by these evolutionists as mosaic, primitive, or pre-human that cannot also be the result of some type of founder effect, inbreeding, environmental degeneration, different population histories, et cetera, and et cetera. You can't look at the world today and picture that's exactly how it was in your immediate post-flood world, your post-Babel world. As we pointed out earlier as well, and what I'm doing here is kind of addressing all of Gutsick Gibbon's arguments in her latest video, things that she said before. Humans have killed and eaten nearly everything, especially in desperate situations, as we talked about earlier. There are people today who eat monkeys, as nasty as that is. I wouldn't. Funny how all the evidence fits perfectly with the generations following the flood and following the Tower of Babel event, which were what? Times of desperation, rough environmental changes. I would not have wanted to live at these times. Rapid adaptive events based on created heterozygosity, people groups going into isolation, and oftentimes, as we see, rapid genetic degeneration. And once again, the Trinkhouse paper that I am accused of misrepresenting supports this. We're looking at times of high stress, times of desperate measures, times where food was scarce, society is being rebuilt, animals are speciating, survivorship being key. I mean, it's just fascinating. I love reading books on evolution, articles on evolution, technical papers from the paleo anthropologists, and just seeing, yeah, they're coming up with a different conclusion, different inferences, they got different assumptions. But what I'm reading, the actual empirical data that is then interpreted based on one's presuppositions, assumptions, worldviews, it fits so perfectly with our model. It's fascinating. I love it. So remember, we don't know what evolved into what when we're looking at their so-called inferences and what they imagine about the fossil record. There's no clear progression from ape-like creatures to humans. These basal traits and primitive traits would be expected to arise gradually. This is what Erica explains in one of her videos. I've watched her videos. I've made notes, watched the videos as well. And it's nothing really that convincing. Now, I will say somebody like Erica would be an individual who, if creationist is going to debate, I've said it over and over again, she's definitely one of the better debaters, one of the more knowledgeable evolutionists. I would even say she's probably surpassed Aaron Ra, which is why I enjoyed debating her 3 times. Maybe we'll have another debate in the future, but got nothing against her personally. We're discussing the science. We're discussing the empirical data. And because she does bring forth good arguments, credit where credit is due, it makes this fun, but when you dig deep, when you get these types of arguments and then you dig deep, you just realize more and more how consistent your model is with the data. It's fascinating stuff. So here's the thing though, and you saw it earlier, okay? The fossil record is scarce, okay? This whole idea of more basal traits and primitive traits being expected to arise gradually, and human evolution would be gradual, but we see no more clarity. As I said, the entire field is in utter confusion. All of these hominids, all of these Australopiths, the human types, they all coexisted, they intermingled. Somebody like Gutsick Gibbon will point to like a robust Australopith or another type of Australopith and say, no, this one didn't coexist. I really, really want to point out the fact that that's probably not true. Based on the data that's constantly incoming, what we see is it's all been a world where it was coexistence. Some ape types of the Australopithecines, maybe they died off a little bit sooner, where it looks like they didn't coexist. It's tough to say their exact histories, but what we see, okay, once again, don't point to the exception. They want to point to the exception to the rule. What we're looking at is coexistence. Your domestic dogs cannot live before the wolf they ultimately descended from. So the Homo genus, interbred, there's no clear progression. This is the fact. The so-called best transitions, and remember her question, let's say Sediba, Habilis, they coexisted as well with the same types that supposedly they evolved into. Look at the new paper about Sediba. It's been ousted out of the human line. So agree to disagree then on the artificial species if you want, even though the data, we spent 30 minutes going over the data directly from the paleo experts, Ella Bin, for example, that suggests it's an artificial species. But, you know, believe what you want. Even if you believe it's a real species, it's been ousted. There's numerous issues that they don't tell you. That's what I want you to take from this, okay? I know it's been a long video, but there's a lot to address. Got a lot of notes written down from things she said in her last couple videos. I think we're nailing it here, but take this away too. You can read about this, hear about this in the paleoanthropologist's own lectures, books, papers, okay? These bones in the dirt, they hate when you say that, but it's a fact. They're open to all sorts of interpretation and storytelling. It's low quality science, like Dr. Rob Stadler points out. It's low confidence science. There's no genetics. There's no direct lines of evidence that we can declare for sure certain relationships. You saw the Aaron Ra video in the beginning. Now, he's obviously not going to agree with me. He's militant against creation. And he says, look at the genetics, look at the molecular clocks. He thinks it supports evolution, but we've shown over and over again that it does not. And that's why they take a long time to address the genetic data, and they bring their whole team together because it's not as easy as they say. They can't look at the data. They can't look at our videos or arguments and respond the very next day. No, it's too in line with our model. It's too in line with a literal Adam and Eve. So there's going to have to be a lot of storyboards, a lot of storytelling. I suspect a lot of dodging from the questions probably. Now, here's the thing. We find a lot of different things in the fossil record, yes. That's because things were different in the past. Different environmental conditions, different mutational events, different population histories, different speciation events, more variety, more variation, oftentimes more heterozygosity, more ability for adaptive change. I should see different adaptive events. Is that really all that surprising when we're looking at bones, bone structure, morphology, anatomy, genetics? You know, it can all be reflections of the past, of the post-flood, post-Babel world. And another thing too, many bones that are fragmented, okay? Because, you know, Erica's question would be, if you find, you know, a piece of scapula here or a piece of scapula way, way far away from the one piece, and you put it together, or like the hand of Sediba, you know, you can place it to the arm, you know, and they connect. Well, nothing's going to connect perfectly, but here's the thing. Many bones with similar morphology and anatomy can easily be positioned in a way that makes it look like they can connect, like a puzzle. Or oftentimes it really could be the same species. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. You had that baboon bone for over 40 years that was looked at as being part of Lucy. That obviously fit and connected, you know, because a lot of these parts are similar between different species. Now, you're not going to, I'd hope not, you're not going to confuse like a dog bone and a human bone, or a dog bone and an ape bone, but oftentimes if you got more similar species, then this can certainly happen where because we've had it, we can see it. We've had bones connected in a way that make it look like it was from the same species for over 40 years. But another big point to take home on this, if we had the genetics, we would know exactly where to place these so-called fossil species. Without the genetics, the evolutionists can storyboard all day long. It can be one big, huge storyboard. And based on her question about differentiating with the fossil record can be a little bit different when you're looking at pathology, when you're looking at different histories, different environmental conditions. Like I said, oftentimes you can misinterpret that which is due to pathology, that which is due to founder effects, inbreeding, mutation accumulation, in the island dwarfism. You can make the mistake. Especially without the genetics, it can happen that you're going to misinterpret it as Australopith-like. But we have many defining features of humans. Humans are fundamentally different from all other forms of life in terms of functionality. We can look at language, culture, for example. One thing I pointed out in my first debate with Erica when it comes to humans and apes and how similar they are, here's the thing. When just stand back and look at humans and chimpanzees and then look at a banana and a dog. Yeah, we're going to share more with the chimpanzees physiologically and genetically because we share more with them when it comes to anatomy. Now we share more in terms of genetics with them than we would with a dog or a fish. This nested hierarchy is natural. Okay, why would God use different building materials and different building systems, different types of DNA, RNA for humans and not the rest of the biological world? That's exactly what we should expect. Some types of creatures that are more similar to other types of creatures and some types of creatures that are less similar. But I asked all these questions to the team Dodgeball, and so we're waiting for answers to that. So I'm not going to rehash that. But I get the feeling that they're pretending like those questions weren't asked based on some of the things I saw in this video, but I guess it is what it is. So here's the thing. Even long before we had DNA sequencing technology, okay, you stand back, you look at humans, you look at the great apes. While we've got a lot in terms of appearance in common, basic body structure, we're both mammals, we both have binocular vision. We also see that there's some differences. Like the feet of the great apes, for example, look at the shape. Look at the shape of their feet. They got feet that look like hands. They're using these for grasping purposes, swinging from trees, for example. Humans have feet, on the other hand, that are what? Built for upright walking. Here's the point. Without even knowing what the DNA sequence is, back in the time before we had DNA sequencing technology, we can just look at their anatomy and physiology, their morphology, and we can conclude that they're a lot more similar than to a fish or a bacteria or a dog. Therefore, a prediction on a DNA level would be we're probably going to be more similar when it comes to DNA as well. Because DNA what? It encodes during the developmental process the anatomy and the physiology that is built. We're similar in these areas, and therefore we should have similarities genetically as well. But now when it comes to the gene function differences, the epigenetic differences, the differences in gene function, the differences in the uniparentally inherited DNA, like the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA, the orphan genes. We could go on and on and on to help differentiate us. But the similarities, yeah, of course. Would you expect no similarities? Humans are just some empty vessel with no DNA, RNA, proteins. It's just, I don't know. You can't really make this stuff up, I guess. But that's what happens when you have a starting point of believing that apes and banana plants are related. It just should not surprise. These similarities shouldn't surprise creationists or evolutionists. And it just gets annoying when they just want to pretend that it only supports common descent. And then they don't want to address the differentiating evidence, okay? They can imagine all day long based on similarities and nested hierarchical patterns that pine trees, banana plants, humans and apes and whales are related. That's not science, though. That's a bad conclusion based off of the empirical observations, okay? Now, it doesn't really matter, like I said, whether we look at the anatomy, the morphology, the genetics, the physiology. We're going to be more closer to a pine tree. We're going to be more closer to an ape than we would be to a pine tree and to a dog and to a bacteria. Okay, it's just common sense. And another thing, too, that comes to mind. The Bible, it doesn't actually in any way say that we should expect biological life and then human life, and that human life has absolutely no similarity to any other species. It's just it's a bad thing to expect. Why would you expect that? That means there's no reason for us to believe that based on our model of biblical creation, that there shouldn't be any type of hierarchy in the biological world. Like I said earlier, there's no reason for us to believe that humans wouldn't be more similar to the apes than to another species. And I feel like we have to just keep harping on this and harping on this. And, you know, what makes us not an ape? Erica constantly asks. You can call a human an ape, I guess, if by calling a human an ape, it's the same way that you're referring to a human as being a mammal, like a whale's a mammal, or a human's a vertebrate, like all the other vertebrates, or eukaryote. Doesn't mean all eukaryotes are related. It doesn't mean all mammals are related. Humans are humans. Okay. They can say humans are apes all day long. It doesn't prove that humans or apes are related in the same way that humans and all mammals wouldn't be related. It's taxonomy, classification games. Doki Doki, thanks so much for the super sticker. So here's the thing. From a Genesis starting point, God doesn't tell us the patterns. God created kinds of creatures in the beginning. But it does tell us very clearly that we were created in his image. From the starting point of the Bible, and they don't like this, but from the starting point of the Bible, we're not an animal, we're not an ape. Deal with it. They always say, deal with it. You're an ape, you're a mammal, you're a vertebrate, you're a eukaryote, you're an animal, you know? No, according to the Bible, you're made in the image of God, and we should find evidence for this, and we do in molecular clocks like mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome, DNA function. So no, we're not apes. Okay. But you just keep saying we're apes because we share most with the apes, in the same way that you call humans mammals because we share a lot with the mammals. Classification wise is man-made. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Okay. It's man-made classification system. Doesn't prove relationship. Now here's the thing. I always point out the fact that we now have the Genesis starting point. God says what? He created us in his image. Let's look at the way humans have created things, the way they've designed things. Now we have an inspiration. We have an idea into the way God may have created us. What types of patterns did God use to create the biological world in the beginning? Well, naturally, we as humans, as I always point out, we build and nested hierarchical patterns. We design things in groups within groups patterns. Take vehicles. Brother John Maddox likes to use computer code where you see functions and subfunctions and you see patterns there. Types of vehicles, modes of transportations, let's say that human engineers are building. They've naturally formed these groups within groups patterns. Take a sedan. It's got a ton of similarities with other sedans, of course. Sedans have more similarities within themselves than they will with a skateboard. Take a van, take a semi-tractor trailer, bring it in, and you'll see that a semi-tractor trailer and a van and an SUV are going to be much more different than a sedan. But those two modes of transportation, they're still similar enough to each other that it's going to set them apart from what? Airplanes, boats, skateboards, all these modes of transportation, getting around, things humans have built, they do form patterns, whether the evolutionists like it or not. So these groups within groups patterns, they emerge. And human engineers are not even doing it on purpose. Okay. So if we're made in the image of God and this is the patterns we build in, God may have done the exact same thing, considering this is what we see. This is what we see, that we find kinds of creatures that are more different to humans, as well as kinds of creatures like apes that are more similar to us. Evolutionists are missing the bigger picture. That's the thing, okay? We can find hierarchies in all of biological life, including humans and apes. But guess what? Apes don't build airplanes. Apes don't write books. Apes aren't sitting here. You know, you don't have a chimpanzee and a gorilla sitting behind a computer right now, streaming and screen sharing and watching videos and reading and looking at articles and papers, okay? They're not composing symphonies. Chimpanzees and other animals don't do any of these things. Guess what? Mankind has built the space shuttle. They've accomplished wonders. We've built skyscrapers. And I've heard this argument, most ridiculous argument. Well, have you built a skyscraper, they'll say? Have you designed a cell phone? You know, me as an individual or someone else as an individual. You know, collectively, the human species, the human race, the human species has built these things. We've accomplished wonders, okay? No single chimpanzee has done these things, and collectively, all the chimpanzees haven't done these things. Like they want to take out, did your 4-year-old daughter build a skyscraper? Give me a break. I could not believe that was a rebuttal, but that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're dealing with here. So did my 4-year-old daughter design a cell phone? No? Oh, okay. So, you know, you're like a chimpanzee. No. Collectively, okay. The groups within groups patterns, the homology, some of the mosaics we find, it's just all simply a hallmark of design. They miss the bigger picture, okay? And this is an answer to Gutsick Gibbon's question. And she could say all day that the question's not been answered. You still didn't answer why we're not apes. You just still didn't answer why we're not different, because she doesn't like the answer. She doesn't want an answer. She's not looking for an answer, but it's been answered. We just spent 2.5 hours, I think, on just 2, maybe 3 questions in most of her video. And I get asked to answer the same question for the 20th time. That's all I'm going to say is you got an answer, but you don't like the answer. But the answer is empirical. The answer is scientific. The answer is logical. It's what we see. So that was long-winded, but it needed to be done. It needed to be done. Another thing, but I'm not going to do it here because I didn't realize there's just so much data. We got to do so many parts. In my book, Human Evolution, Matt writes an appendix, phenomenal appendix. It is, let me see, I'm going to flip to it here. Boom, boom, boom. The title of it is Cladistics by Matt, and he goes through a large number of features too that are different between the humans and the apes. But Erica has that book. Also, there's the Refuting Critics book. So here's the thing. A lot of these answers, too, they're found in the books. They're found in our other videos. So we don't want to just repeat the same things over and over again. So 4:30, 2.5 hours later, 25 people in the chat. Bill Morgan, good to see you, brother. Good to see you. I texted you back. I like the news that you had. Reach out, Bill. We love you. You're a fan favorite. You're a blessing. You've given us so much of your time, and we appreciate it. We also got to get together to talk about that Biology and Genetics Made Easy series. George Bond says, a pig's tooth became Nebraska man and his wife. Yeah, isn't that amazing? That one single tooth from a pig, and they knew what the man and his family looked like. That's amazing. I wonder if they found my isolated toe bone. I wonder if they'd be able to tell what my wife looked like by that toe bone. Low confidence science. Let's see. Duck, dive, dip, dodge. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. The 5 Ds of dodge, team dodgeball. I'll give credit where credit is due. You know, Erica, she makes it fun. She's a good sport. You know, and I got to say that when it comes to Dan, people like Dan, who are the team captain, MVP of Team Dodgeball, you know, I don't find is as good of an interlocutor as somebody like Erica. And I think that's why Dan doesn't really do the response videos, because he can't. He's seen answers to all his questions. We've had even Dr. Rob Carter destroy a number of them. And I've put them all in clip forms too. So, yeah. Let's see. We got a lot of good people in the chat. Nicholas, Gavin, good to see you. Doki Doki Bible Club, Super Sticker Master. Thank you so much. Gavin, brother, good job in your debate the other day. Daniel says, just imagine. Imagination. PhD in imaginations. Evolutionists hope, dream, and imagine that banana plants and humans are related. How do they look down at their dog? You know, I don't look at my family dog and think, wow, look at those similarities. Look at the nose, the legs, the eyes, the fur. We're mammals, eukaryotes, vertebrates. We must be related, you know, like only in the mind of an evolutionist. Okay, awesome. The chat, you guys always stay lively. You keep it fun. No problem, Gavin. No problem. So we went for 2.5 hours. I still got some other stuff I want to touch on, but we're going to call it a night here. For the most part, actually, you can go have a look at Erica's video she put out if you want to, and nearly all of it addressed, you know, and you've seen a lot of articles, papers, videos. It's been interactive tonight. So definitely share around. Human evolution, you know, it's dead. And the thing is, we didn't even really have to go into the direct evidence, the high quality, high confidence science, the genetics that we did in our last videos, because it's all consistent with our model. And the more you dig deep, the more you see the glory of God. So anyways, guys, God bless. Thank you so much. Thursday, we have Kent Hovind back. He's going to be debating Derek Barnes. We're in the midst of setting up some more interviews, discussions. A lot to look forward to, guys. Orient Express says, thank all. Great people and great content. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys. So God bless, and everybody have a good night till we see you again.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting